find what is it that interpersonal relationships give us. So from the time a child is born, they search for the touch, they search for eye contact. What are we looking for? So I want to give you an exercise. Think about somebody who you really, really like, a dear friend, a close relative. Okay, someone who you feel that your life is richer and better because of that person. So when you think of that person, if I were to ask you, why did you choose this person? I realize you're English, so I won't waste my life trying to get you to answer. But usually what people answer is that they're sincere, I can trust them, they're warm, have a sense of humor, like me. The reason you like the person who you like the best is because of their spiritual traits, not their bodies. So I want to tell you why this is important. Okay, if you think about other pleasures that life holds, personally, I like quiche. I also like fried chicken. I don't know what you like. You there? So suppose we were to come home tonight and discover somebody had purchased exactly the dinner you like the best. It would make you happy as long as the food's there until you're finished. But then it's gone. So the pleasure was real. Notice I'm not a Hindu. I'm not telling you it's illusory. It's real. But it's short-lived because the body can't hold on to it. In contemporary society, people will notice this, but their need for something more will go to aesthetic connection, music, dance, art, nature, vacations. But even there, the pleasure that you have doesn't become you. You could have a great vacation in a gorgeous place, but you don't become the gorgeous place. You could listen to great music, but you don't become great music. You're left with yourself. But the pleasure of relationship, interpersonal relationship, you become the other person. They become part of your character and they affirm and validate who you are. They make you more human, more yourself. So because of this, most people prefer the perfect friend or perfect husband or perfect wife to the perfect chocolate bar. Not everybody, but most. So in interpersonal relationships, what we're really looking for is connection. Connection to my spirit and the other person's spirit. So because of this, there's a verse that says, God says, don't abandon your friend, your father's friend. Rabbi Akiva, the great sage, said, what that means is look for the source of friendship, which is the godliness in yourself and in other people. But there are always impediments in interpersonal relationships. So I'm going to speak about two specific sorts of impediments. Most other impediments will fall into these categories. 1, difference. 2, having done something wrong. Let's look at this. When you find somebody who you like, odds are they're similar to you. Similar opinions, similar personalities, similar lifestyle. In fact, the more similar the person is, the easier it is for you to communicate. So the reason why we're drawn to that which is similar is because it's the ultimate validation. So there are difficulties that are inherent to the fact that everybody is different and nobody is exactly like you. There are different forms of typology that have become popular. Some of you are familiar with them. The Enneagram, 8 basic types of personality, other systems. But there is something to it. There are basic personality types. So let's say you're an idealistic and emotional type. You don't think of yourself as being emotional and idealistic. You think of yourself as being yourself, regular, me. When you meet somebody who's, let's say, more concrete and less emotional, you may find yourself judging them without noticing that you're judging them. So rather than saying they're practical, you may say they're unimaginative, uninspired. Rather than saying they're not emotional, you might say they're rigid and cold. Now, conversely, suppose your personality was practicality, and perhaps you're not emotionally effusive. You don't think of yourself as being uneffusive or cold. What do you think of yourself as being? Normal. So somebody else who's emotional and who's idealistic may be seen by you as being over the hill, over the top. This person, she doesn't think. She can't even put her feet on the floor. What you're really saying is she's different. So emotional and intellectual differences are one set of differences. Another set of differences is practicality and idealism. Another set of differences would be impulsivity and being determined. And this goes on and on. Okay, so we tend to look for the familiar and we tend to look for the validating. This is a huge problem. Okay, so now I'm going to tilt my hands and tell you, these are the cards. You don't see the cards? They're there. Okay. It's on purpose. God made us all very different. No two people are absolutely the same. Even people who look the same, identical twins, are not the same. We all have different things to achieve in life, and we all have to be different. So ideally, your response to different will not be a feeling of being disconnected. That might be the instinctive response, but the ideal response is, what could this person teach me that I don't already know? What could I give to this person that I haven't already given? So I want to tell you a true story. Okay, I'd say it was as far back as the 70s, maybe early 80s. The Israeli government still had a policy that was left over from the British, who picked it up from the Turks. The Turks had a law in which if anybody lives in a house for a year or more, they have settlers' rights, squatters' rights, and you can't get rid of them. So in the modern world, what that meant is nobody was willing to rent out apartments for a full year because it's like giving your house away. So the rental situation in Israel was brutal at that time. It was very, very hard to find a long-term rental. All of the rental contracts went until 11 months, and then maybe they would renew it, and then again, maybe they would renew it only if they increased the rent. So it was difficult. There was one particular apartment in the Bukhari neighborhood in Yerushalayim where the owners lived abroad, and they didn't want to be bothered with dealing with new people all of the time. So they rented the apartment long-term to people who they thought were trustworthy. So a friend of mine came, and she rented this apartment. I met her in the street one day, and I said to her, "How's it going?" She said, "Great. Everything about Israel is even better than I thought. I have a good job. My husband has a good job. We're settled. The only thing is the apartment, but we're lucky to have found a long-term apartment." Now, I should have said nothing at that point. And sometimes you're supposed to remember the big N. Nothing. Say nothing. But instead, I said, "What's the problem with the apartment?" I said, "It's not the apartment. It's the people." Now, what should I have said? Nothing, because I can't fix this. So I said, "What's the problem with the people?" He said, "Well, it's my neighbor specifically. She's across the hall from me. She must be like close to 80. She's from Iran. We have barely a common language, her bad Hebrew and my bad Hebrew. I come home from work. My husband comes home 3 hours later. I have a part-time job. He has a full-time job. I have no one to talk to. Okay, I don't know anyone here, and I feel like I'm in a desert island. When my husband comes home, I pounce, "Hi!" Okay, so it's a problem. Okay, so she eventually found a different apartment, and also the law loosened up a bit, and she lives now in an English-speaking environment. Somebody else I know rented the apartment. So I met the other person also, and she also was doing well. Said, how's it going? And she says, the best is the apartment. Those of you who are familiar with the laws against speaking Lashon Hara, which is talk that's either harmful or negative, will know that I did the wrong thing. I said, you mean they have new neighbors? I couldn't picture what she would have found so appealing about the other neighbor. I said, no, this woman's been living there, since the mandate. I said, really? So this is her story. This is her take on someone from a different culture and in a completely different age bracket. So it's amazing. In America, when I would make rice, there was a kind of rice, I don't know if they have this in England or not. It's called Uncle Ben's. You can't make it wrong. You put in water and it comes out good. In Israel, you have to make it right. So I went to my neighbor. I know she's Persian. I said, my rice comes out disgusting. Do you have any ideas? And she came with a bowl of rice and showed it to me. It was perfect. So I went to her house. She taught me how to make rice. And then when I made it, after a few tries, I showed it to her. That led to our inviting her for Kiddush on Shabbos morning, which led her to inviting me to see her picture album. Do you know how interesting life in Persia was 70 years ago? How different it was? It was like a step into another world. That led me to invite her in to see our wedding video. And that led her to introducing us to her grandson, who was a soldier in the Israeli army, and indeed the first real Israeli we met. If not for this woman, I would be living the same day again and again. She opened my eyes to the real Israel. So ideally, you should treasure people for their differences because they could teach you what you don't know already. But you have to learn how to reframe things. Rudeness could be spontaneity. Okay, disinterest could be privacy. You have to learn how to reframe it. You have to change your inner dialogue. Why should you bother doing this? The reason why it's worth doing this is because this broadens and deepens your relationship to God Himself. You see His many faces, so to speak, displayed through the faces of other people. His traits, His personae, all come forth from what you could learn from others. So that's if the issue between you and the other person is difference. But sometimes it's not different. Sometimes difference may open the door towards personal difficulties in relationships, but sometimes there's something else. Maybe the other person did something wrong. So before I talk to you about that, I want to just reiterate some of the things that we've said. We said that people are different because nobody has the whole of God, and we're meant to be seekers of the complete vision of spiritual truth and reality. We said that you do this by learning from people and giving to people. We said that difference should be treasured and not negated. So before I go further, I want to add one thing. This is especially relevant in marriage. It's only normal to want to be validated, to want your spouse to agree with your views, to understand you, to respond to your emotions. But your spouse isn't you. You're a person, and your husband is a person. Ideally, instead of trying to convert him to being a male version of you, you should try to say, and what am I learning from who he actually is, and what could I give him? So the act of giving creates bonding. So I want to give you an axiom. If you want to like someone, this only works if you want to like them. Find what you could give them. Giving creates bonding. So this works on every level. We have people who are so vulnerable, who are so afraid of life, who've been rejected so many times and are in such pain, that even giving them a plant will give them a sense of validation. There are people who live alone who need a pet. Giving creates the possibility of love, and one of our deepest needs is to give love. So if you want to like someone, find what you could give them for their sake and for yours. So that has to do with dissimilarity being an interpersonal issue. I'll stop now for a moment. You all have microphones. If any of you have questions, you could ask now. Now is a good time to ask. Or if you want to write something on the chat, now is a good time to write. Any questions now? And if not, we'll go on to our next segment. Okay, going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay, next segment. What if the person did something wrong? So there are a few questions you have to ask. The first and most basic question is, who said they're wrong? There are many things that are just difference, but we make right and wrong out of it. For instance, let's say somebody isn't as hygienic as we would like them to be. They have no obligations to us to be hygienic. That has to do with their obligations to themselves. It's not my issue, it's their issue. The law and the Jewish law, the halacha, doesn't demand that people take showers a specific number of times a week. It's good, it's valid, it's wonderful, but it's not a demand you could make of another person. People have their own lives. Another difference, there are some people who talk more than others. I personally find people who go on and on to be very irritating. But that's their right. I don't have the right to determine how many words per minute they should speak. That's not my choice. It's not a matter of right or wrong. They're still a valid human being. I could still learn from them. I could still give to them. Okay. So there is such a thing as right and wrong. But you have to be very careful about the many disguises it wears. How do you know if something is right or wrong? So the Judaic answer to that question is, if the Torah says it's wrong, it's wrong. If the Torah says it's right, it's right. It's not a subjective measure. So theft is wrong because it says don't steal. Heavy people who wear tight clothes in loud colors are not wrong. It may not be your taste, but that's all it is. Don't turn personal preferences into right or wrong. Okay, if the person is wrong, what should you do? So I'm going to leave you with the question for a moment, and I'm going to put the entire presentation in a different light. Why care about people at all? Some of you are familiar with the poem that was turned into a song, No Man is an Island. This is true. We aren't happy alone. We aren't fulfilled alone. But there's something bigger than that. No one is the whole. The Jewish people are compared to a gigantic body with many limbs and many organs. The body isn't whole without all of them. So when you're dismissive of someone, not only are you lacking something in your own personal perspective, but you're disallowing the whole to function. Now, as we said already, we're drawn towards familiarity. Okay, here's something else to consider. If you think about it deeply, you'll realize we all want the same things. What are some universal wants? We all want basic security, food, clothing, shelter. We all want to feel beloved. We all want to be connected. Okay. What don't we want? We don't want rejection. We don't want threat. We don't want lack. So this is universal. If you wish to connect with someone, you can connect on the basis of what we all have in common universally. What gets in the way? What gets in the way isn't just the issue of right or wrong, which we have to still speak about. What gets in the way is external difference. In the inside, we're the same. On the outside, we're different. Age, culture, language, education, basic personality, they could all be different. So learn to train your eye to get past the external and go to what you share in common with everyone. So now I want to give you a different exercise. Before I asked you to think of somebody who you like. Now I'm going to ask you to think of someone who you don't particularly like. Okay, you're there? So ask yourself, is it possible that this person has never done anything good? Nothing good? Nothing good? The person has done some good. Connect on that level. Find what you have in common. They want the same things that you want. They long for what you long for. Find something in common. And once you do that, something magical happens, something really magical. Once you find what they have in common, you're identified with them. And if you're going to correct them, it'll be for their sake and not just for yours. So I want to tell you a true story. Some of you may have heard of the famous tzaddik of Yerushalayim, Rav Aryeh Levine. He's a very interesting personality. So he came from Lithuania, and his own childhood was difficult. He grew up in abject poverty. He was on his own from when he was in his early teens. He made his way to Israel, became a rabbi, and he appointed himself the chaplain of the prisons. This is in the 1920s and early 1930s. There was no such job. It wasn't something for which he was paid. It was a self-appointed job. And he would go there every Shabbat, would hold a service for the prisoners, Kriyat Torah, everything. Israel could be hot in the summer. He walked from where he lived in Nachlaot, some of you are familiar with Yerushalayim, to the prison, which is all the way near the Jaffa Gate. Could be very hot. Could be even hotter when he returned. In the winter, it could rain. He never missed a week. He was there in his unpaid position. So he ended up in the course of time having two completely different kinds of congregations. His first congregation were people he would expect to find in prison. Thieves, con artists, people who did acts of violence. But then, as time passed, in the 30s, the prisoners were mostly young men who were in rebellion against the British. Very idealistic, whether you agree with their ideals or not is a different question, but they were idealistic. Educated, a completely different group. So these two groups, the criminals and the idealists, had to live together. And he was one of the things that held it together. He treated everyone with such respect. They learned to see what was good in each other, enough to get along. Okay. Till the specific prisoner came. There was a man who, in a fit of rage, killed his wife, Erev Yom Kippur, over a fight they were having about the garbage. Who takes out the garbage? He murdered her. So the other prisoners were very offended by this. They didn't want anything to do with him. So he had been given a life sentence, and he became depressed. He's in the prison, but he sits down by a table. Everybody got up and walked away from the table. He had nothing to look forward to except lifelong rejection. So he stopped eating. He was so depressed, he stopped eating. So the British authorities realized that if he were to die of hunger in the prison, that would make them look bad. So they summoned Rav Aryeh Levine and said, you have to do something with him. So going back to the way of thinking that I spoke to you about, he could look at this man and see this is a person who wants what I want. This is a person who's very different than me, different in education, in values, in personality. On the outside, nothing is the same. On the inside, there's a basis of speech. And he also saw this person as part of the whole. He's part of the whole. So he went into the man's cell and he said, "You did a terrible thing." And the man looked up because he thought, he knew the British sent him. He thought he was going to minimize it. He didn't minimize it. He said, "You did a terrible thing. But you can change yourself from the inside. You can't change the outside, but you can change the inside. And God gave you the favor of putting you in a place where you could think this through. You don't want to carry this with you to the grave. You have to repent." And the man did. So why am I telling you this story? This story is about looking at someone who's genuinely wrong, not justifying what they did. And I'll tell you why that's extremely important. Not justifying what they did for their sake. But instead of justifying what they did, trying to give them an appreciation of who they could be on the basis of what they did. Okay. Okay, so why not justify what the person did? If you really believe in a person, if you really could see that there's something good there, you'll realize that if someone did something wrong, then that's an impediment to them. The worst and most patronizing thing you could say to someone is, "From you, I didn't expect anything better. Given who you are, given your family, given your limitations, from you, I expect nothing." Nothing could be more patronizing than that. Seeing the other person means saying, in words or not in words, "From you, I expect something. You could be something. I believe you could be something. And if you've made mistakes, I believe you can get past them." So now going back to what we're talking about, because we made a major detour. We want people. We need people. We're drawn towards that which is familiar. We experience impediments. One response to impediments is to get past difference. Another is to appreciate the other person as being a person who may have flaws, but underneath the flaws, there's somebody who you want to like and you want to know, and the path towards discovering that person is through giving. So now we're going to talk about two kinds of giving. Giving to someone with whom you don't have a problem, and giving to somebody with whom you do have a problem. It says in the Torah, "Love your neighbor as you love yourself." So I want to tell you a secret. You will never love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love means closeness. You're not as close to anyone as you are to yourself. When it says love your neighbor as you love yourself, it's a relative term. It's not absolute. It means want for your neighbor what you want for yourself. Okay, so there are three basic laws in the Torah of how to do this. Your goal is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Here's the minimum level. There are three basic laws. One, speak well of people. Notice what I didn't say. I didn't say don't speak badly of people. I said speak well of people. When you hear a good story, when you hear a noble act that somebody did, find the right person to repeat it to. So this has several effects. One effect is it teaches you to turn your eye to see that which is positive, that will broaden you and deepen you. And it does something else. It also makes you like people. The opposite is true when you speak lashon hara, which is again negative or harmful speech. It teaches you to see only the external, and it teaches you to dislike people. So the first is to tell the good story. Okay, I'll give you a very undramatic good story. I have hundreds of good stories because I meet good people. You know, when you're a teacher, you like, I have the best job in the world. I teach in Neve and in Benos Avigail. Everybody who comes wants to learn and to grow. Could it be better than that? I know a million good stories. I'm just going to tell you one short one because it's one that I just heard recently. Okay, there was a young man who came from the sort of home where there's not a great deal of Torah education, but he became interested when he was still very young. And the Jewish Agency offered young people the opportunity in those years to go to Israel and to study in one of the affiliated institutions or to go to kibbutz. And it was only $750. So he got the money together and he's off, and he decided that what he wants to do in his year in Israel was the year between high school and university, that he wants to go to a yeshiva. So they placed him in a yeshiva, and there were other boys in his group. So they were willing to open a special class for boys with limited background, but some of the boys wanted to go into the mainstream class. They wanted to really challenge themselves. They were invited to the Rosh Yeshiva's office, and they were told beforehand to prepare a Tosafot. What's a Tosafot? The Talmud, okay, is written in a style in which premises are presented and argumentation is presented. The argumentation is very difficult, hard to follow, requires a great deal of research and a great deal of analytical thinking. There are major commentators on every page of Talmud. In the margin, you'll have a commentator called Rashi, and on the edge, you'll have his grandsons, who are his super commentators, who are called Tosfot. We were told to prepare something. They had enough Hebrew to do it. Okay, so he came in to the Rosh Yeshiva, and the Rosh Yeshiva said, "Okay, what do you think the Tosfot have to say about this question? What does the Talmud say? What does Rashi say? Why doesn't Tosfot agree? What's their theory?" And he had it all prepared. He had it on his paper, and the Rosh Yeshiva destroyed it, totally destroyed it. You're speaking illogically. You didn't make this point. You didn't take notice of that point. And he left, and he was the only one of the group who was accepted to the mainstream. So he asked the Rosh Yeshiva, he felt comfortable with him. He said, "Why did you accept me and not the others? I didn't know what I was talking about either." And he said, "Because when we finished, you said, 'Thank you for correcting me. I see that I had it wrong. I appreciate knowing the truth about what the Talmud's intent was.'" So that's called caring about truth, and that's a good story. When you hear a story like that, which, as I said, not such a dramatic story, but when you hear a story like that, it teaches you one thing: commit to truth. So the more you could say the good stories, the more you will like people. That's halacha number one. There are only three. Second halacha, treat people with respect. You're English. You know how to do this. I'm American. Even I could learn how to do it. That means eye contact. That means not walking away while the other person is still talking. That means taking people seriously. So since everyone has something to teach you, treating people as though they're your teacher. So I can't resist telling you a true story. I'm American. What could you do? It's in my blood, and I'm from Brooklyn. It gets worse. Okay. So once I was in South Africa, and I was on a short flight between Johannesburg and Cape Town. And I got my seating card, and I held it upside down, but I didn't know I held it upside down. So I sat myself down in seat number 66, but really it was seat number 99. How does a South African get you out of their seat? Man comes over to me and says, "I'm so sorry, it appears there might be an error." And he shows me his card. And I look at mine. I realize, yes, his is right side up, mine is upside down. So I begin to get up. And again, "I'm so sorry for having troubled you. It's just that this is really my seat." Okay. And he apologized the third time. Then I went to sit where I should have sat to begin with. Now I went from South Africa to New York, back to Israel. So on my way back to Israel, I'm on a plane, and everybody on the plane is Jewish and from New York. It's a different sort of atmosphere. I sat on the right seat. I had an aisle seat. There was a teenager next to me, and her friend was in the other aisle seat. So they're talking over me, eating. Okay, the whole. So finally, the teenager in the aisle seat asked me if I wanted to switch seats with her. I said yes. So now I'm sitting in the other aisle seat. A man's getting on. He says, "You're sitting in my seat." Okay, the teenager was sitting in the wrong seat. Now, how does somebody from New York get you out of your seat? Lady, get up! Okay, and it's a whole other. He says, "Oh, call me." So you have to treat people with respect. You have to take people seriously. That's the second law. Two laws, again, speak well of people, treat them with respect. And the third is be helpful. If you see somebody experiencing difficulty, be helpful. You see the elderly lady in the supermarket and she overshopped and she's having trouble bringing her stuff to the car. Don't say, boy, it's a shame that some people lose upper body strength as they age. Help. Okay, somebody dropped their pocketbook or their phone. They keep on walking. They didn't notice that it fell. Pick it up and give it to them. Why? Because that turns you into the giver in the relationship and it creates bonding. So these are the only three laws. It's not huge. Again, tell the good stories, treat people with respect, and be helpful. What will this do? This will give you a positive, bonding, respectful relationship to others. I'm going to repeat it one more time because if you forget everything else in our talk tonight, remember this. Again, tell the good stories. Treat people with respect. Be helpful. This could change your life. It could turn your life inside out. But now, so put on Aryeh Levine's hat. You see somebody has blocked themselves. They've done something wrong. So if you care about them, if you believe in their inherent goodness, you're going to try to help them. So I want to talk to you about what your motivation would be ideally. Then we'll talk about actually. This actually happened to someone I know. A man and his wife were in America for the summer with their children. And the husband and wife wanted to see the museums and the sites and visit relatives. And the children, two girls, wanted to shop. For them, this America is just like one big store. So they would nudge, can't we go here? Can't we go there? And their desire to see what their parents wanted to see wasn't as broad as one would like. So finally, after their nagging, the parents gave in and said, okay, you could, Friday morning, you could go by yourselves as long as you're back at 2, Shabbat is at 7, be in the house at 2, go downtown and shop. They gave them written instructions, exactly where to get off the train, exactly how to find the big stores, which then were all located more or less on 42nd Street and thereabouts, Macy's, Bloomingdale's, A&S. And you have to leave no later than 12:30 to be back here at 2. Okay, they repeated the instructions, they got on the train. They got there. They did their shopping. They saw their sites. They no doubt, I don't know this as a fact, I'm just thinking about things I did as a teenager. Probably a lot of trying on the try-on makeup, probably a lot of dousing the free perfume. I don't know that that's a fact. Okay, now it's 12:30. It's time to get back. And they said, okay, let's go. We don't get like, we don't want to get into trouble. Then there was this, okay, you have the paper? No, I gave you the paper. You never gave me the paper. You have the paper. Look in your bag. It's not here. I gave it to you. Now, if they had greater maturity, they would have gone into one of the big stores and asked permission to use a phone and call their parents. But they weren't. They were teenagers. So they said, okay, like, let's get on the train. And like, we'll remember, we'll remember where to get off. So they got off the wrong stop and they were in a terrible neighborhood. What's the worst thing you could do in a terrible neighborhood? You're surrounded by people who look tough and are tough. They cried. 2 white Jewish teenage girls crying on Fulton Street. Okay, a Jewish storekeeper saw what was going on. He brought them into his store. He literally closed the store. He closed his shop and locked it and took them home. If you were the parents, how would you feel towards the storekeeper? You'd be grateful, right? Okay, that's how God feels towards us when we help somebody who's headed in the wrong direction get home. So the idea is when you see someone doing something wrong to care enough about them, to help them turn right. It's not a matter of you're asserting your needs over theirs. It's not a matter of being superior. There's a method. I'm going to take you through the method, and then I'm going to bring you back to situations in which the method won't work. First, before you even think of discussing any negative behavior with somebody else, you have to ask yourself a question. Am I sure it's negative behavior? Maybe it's just individualization. You're sure it's wrong. They borrowed money and they're not returning it even though they have it. Okay. Next, you have to put yourself in their place, in your mind. Did I ever do something like this? What was I thinking? What was I feeling? Okay. How would I have wanted someone to talk to me if they caught me in this behavior? I'm sure everybody who's listening has at least one moment that they would not want to share with anyone, certainly not with a group. So bring yourself back to that moment. Say, how would I have liked to be treated? Okay. Next. Now you're ready to talk to the person. Here are the conditions. The first condition is privacy. Never, ever, ever, ever try to bring up something that must be changed in front of an audience. Why? Because the person will have to defend themselves. Your enemy in helping someone change is defensiveness. The more people are there, the more the person has to prove that they're right. So never, ever, ever do this in front of other people, besides which they'll be embarrassed. Okay, so the first thing is private. Private means if you have a problem, this is another thing that you have to remember. Remember, we have the 3 laws I just told you. Here's one other thing. You have a problem with a person, you speak to the person. Again, you have a problem with someone, you speak to that person, not about that person, to the person. You don't speak about people, you speak to people. Now, there are exceptions to this. If your status is so high that they'll be devastated if they know you saw their flaw, then you would have to ask somebody else. Or conversely, if you have so little status that they won't take you seriously, you sometimes have to involve an authority figure. But the general rule is, again, talk to people, not about people. Next rule. Talk about the deed, not about the person. You borrowed $100 from me last month. You told me you were giving it back the next day. I've asked you for it a number of times. Every time I ask you for it, you say you don't have it or you'll bring it tomorrow, but I need my money. Okay, talk about the deed. Okay, but you don't do it the way I did it now. I'm going to introduce a twist that turns it differently. You ask about the deed, not an accusation, a question. Didn't I lend you $100 2 weeks ago? I thought you said you would pay it back in a week, in a day. What's the story? What's happening? Okay, again, didn't I is a good phrase, or I think that, or wasn't it? Okay, you ask a question. The reason why you say your accusation as a question is twofold. One is sometimes you're wrong. Of course I borrowed $100 from you and I paid you back the next day. Don't you remember? It was in front of Ron and Herbert, and then Ron said, glad you paid her back, she owes me. Remember that? Oh, right. Okay, sometimes you're wrong. But even if you're not, if you say, what's the story? It gives the other person the opportunity to explain themselves. So again, you borrowed $100. You said you're giving it back the next day. What's the story? I'm still asking you about it. So make an excuse. The excuse may be valid or may not be valid. But as soon as they made the excuse, they feel heard. Okay, and it also keeps you from demonizing the person. If you could hear their excuse, they won't seem like this big bad demon. Next step. Okay. Okay. Bye, Sylvia. So, next step. The next step is after you've done this, you've given the opportunity to say an excuse, you have to repeat their excuse so they'll feel heard. Then you tell them what you want them to do. You don't leave them hanging. Okay. So they said, yeah, I'm a little tight now, maybe next month. I said, no, I need the money now. Is there somebody you could borrow it from? Do you have some money in your wallet? Let's make a repayment plan. Tell them whatever it is that you want to tell them. Most of the time, if you give them a specific plan, they'll do it. Sometimes they won't. So you have to be prepared to talk to them about the same matter twice or 3 times. And if you're making progress, then you may have to stay on longer. Sometimes the person will not change. Why will that happen? So sometimes people have gotten into habituated behavior. For instance, lying. Do any of you know people who lie a lot? You know anybody who really lies a lot? You ask them what time it is, you don't know. They'll tell you the time that they think you want it to be, that sort of thing. Where were you? It could be like, people who lie a lot like to avoid blame. They like to be in the center of attention. They may have developed this behavior as a 2-year-old. The fact that you gave them 5 minutes of your time doesn't mean that they have the inner capacity to change. So sometimes people can't change because of the problem of, I would call this the Coke machine problem. In America, again, maybe they have this thing as well. They have machines that sell Coca-Cola and other soft drinks. You put in the money and you press a button and the cola comes out. There's no self-change machine. You can't put in the money, press the button, and come out honest, patient, developed, sensitive. And not everybody has the ability to work. So at that point, either you're with them in their struggle, which is ideal, or you accept that they have a flaw. Just like who? Who else has flaws? You do. So you accept that people have flaws. You could defend yourself from the flaw. If somebody is dishonest financially, don't lend them money. But you could still tell the good stories, treat them with respect, and be helpful. But don't trust them with money. If somebody is physically abusive, don't get in, don't act as though you have corona, absolute social distance. This person's hands are not going to reach your body. You could still tell the good stories, and you could still treat them with respect. You could still be helpful. The person may be emotionally dangerous. They may be toxic. Toxic. Don't share your inner life with them. But you could still speak well of them. You could still treat them with respect, and you could still be helpful. But protect yourself. It's foolish to not protect yourself. In religion B, okay, they'll say, turn the other cheek. In Judaism, we'll say, that's not good for you. Not good for you. But it's also not good for you to allow somebody else to be violent. It's not good for anyone. Don't turn your cheek. Defend yourself against the consequences of their flaws, but still see them as a person. Okay, last thing. The last thing when you're talking about human relationships is to be patient. People are evolving continually. Someone might be unreachable today, will be reachable tomorrow. You may be intolerant today, and you'll be intolerant, and you'll be more tolerant tomorrow. So I'm going to conclude. Don't get scared. People who know me know as soon as I say I'm going to conclude, that means 25 more minutes. No. Okay, I'm going to really conclude by going back to something I said earlier. So remember I told you that if there's somebody who has major flaws that are so big that they conceal all of the good inside them, if you could remember just one good thing that's real, see what's something real in them, and you relate to them from that place, then you see them through a different prism, and they may change. So now I want to conclude, again, second time I say conclude, learn to do this with yourself. You have flaws, we all have flaws. You've made mistakes, we all make mistakes. You may have covered the part of you that's good and whole and perfect with many, many layers. In today's world, low self-esteem it's a pandemic no less destructive than the coronavirus. Learn to see that there are some things about you that you've actually done, not cliches like all people are good. There are things you've actually done that are good. And when you find yourself tearing yourself down, force yourself to see what's good in you just as you would do that for another person. And that's going to change you. And the more you see your own goodness, the easier it is for you to maintain relationships. Because in the end, they take us all back to the soul and to Hashem. Be good to yourselves. So this is what I'm concluding with. I left time for questions. And I realized that might have been foolish because this is England, but I did leave time for questions. So if you have some questions on any of this, people who are different, people who are wrong, how to speak to somebody who's wrong, how to like somebody, how to like yourself, these are big issues. The 3 laws of Ahavat Yisrael, which, as you hope, this is the 4th time I mentioned it. Tell the good stories, give kavod, be helpful. Our 1 negative rule, talk to people about, but not about them. We learned something. So if you have questions on any of these big areas, the time to ask is now. Okay. So Gabby says hi, and Sylvia excused for waiting. Nobody has anything more to say than that.
Rebbetzin, hi.
Yeah, unmute yourself.
Am I still muted?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
You said speak good about people, but then you said even people who could be abusive or
Yes.
have faults, then aren't you if you're speaking good about this person, aren't you misleading other people by speaking good about that person?
So using the example of the murderer in the prison in Rav Aryeh Levine.
Yeah, I mean, that's an extreme example, but it could, yeah.
Right. So that doesn't mean, again, the most patronizing and wrong thing you could say about someone who you really believe in is that you expect nothing from them. So in terms of making somebody who's, let's say, financially dishonest sound like he's an honest person, isn't right for them and isn't right for your listener. So you would have to say, this guy is he's so much fun. Don't lend him money, but he's a great guy.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, more questions? Okay. Going once. Going twice. Okay. Okay. And H me says thank you. Okay, thank all of you.
Thank
for
you so
being
much,
here.
Rebbetzin Hella.
Okay, thank you, Batsheva. And I just want to mention that it's important for you to realize that during this time, which we're suffering so much tragedy from the coronavirus, I'm not saying I know why this is happening. I don't think anybody knows why, but what is that we're forced to be distant from each other. And surely if we could become closer, it could only be a source of merit. So that I'll tell you good night. Okay, shalom, shalom.
Thank you so much, Rebbetzin Hella. Such as a chai. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.